Good morning, everybody. I can see people are joining the webinar. I will wait just a couple of minutes while Zoom lets everybody in, and then I will introduce myself and we will begin. I can see there are lots and lots and lots of people joining, which is fantastic. Lots of people saying hello in the chat. That's fantastic. I have, although it does say that the chat will be disabled during the session, I did ask that it were left open because I may well be asking you some questions during the session and inviting you to interact with me a little bit. So hopefully the chat does stay open so that you can write comments in the chat and greet each other and greet me. I can see we've got people from all over Eastern Europe, which is really exciting for me. I wish I could be there with you. Hopefully one day I will be. So the attendee count seems to have stabilized. I will begin. Good afternoon, everybody. I think afternoon where you are. It's morning for me here. I am on the other side of the world from you. So it is currently 6:02 a.m. Hopefully I don't look too tired still. I got up a few minutes ago. I live in Colombia, in Bogota. My name is Nick Perkins, and I work with Pearson as a global ambassador for a teaching series called English Code. Just so you can see a little bit about a little bit of what my place looks like. This is the view from my kitchen window about 20 minutes ago, just as I was making my morning coffee, which I'm still drinking. It's a beautiful morning in Bogota. It looks, we're just coming out of rainy season. So it's really nice to wake up in the morning nowadays and see a clear sky and hopefully what looks like is going to be a sunny day. And just after we finish this presentation, I will be going out on my bicycle and riding up that mountain that you can see in the background of the picture. It's one of the classic Bogota morning bicycle rides up to a place called the Alto de Patios, which is a mountain pass that goes over that mountain on the back of the picture behind you. I can see someone says that they wish they could have that view. Yes, I feel very privileged. I was very lucky to find an apartment with a view like that. And I can see that there's people from all over Eastern Europe with us today. Welcome to you all. I won't be able to greet you all in person, but I do sincerely hope that at some point in the not too distant future, we will be able to be at a conference together and actually say hello to each other. I see someone says it's the other way around. Rainy season has just started. Isn't that funny? I'm on the other side of the world and the other side of the climate spectrum. So what are we here to talk about today? Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about future skills. I'm going to talk about why they're very important in education, especially in primary education. And we're also going to look at how Pearson incorporated future skills into the English teaching series, English Code, in a way that's very accessible to teachers and that enables primary school teachers to work with future skills with their primary school students very easily in the classroom. Do I apologize? I'm not sure if I apologize, but I think it is kind of an apology, but it's not an apology for something that I did. Apologies that we won't be able to interact because of the nature of the current situation we're in. Obviously, we can't be together. I usually try to do quite interactive presentations. The problem is when it's a webinar, it's quite difficult to get interaction. So do feel free to put any questions you have, any comments you have, or if I ask anything, write in the chat box. I do have the chat box open right next to me. I can see everything that you're writing in the chat. So hopefully we can get some interaction going that way. I will also be asking you in about 20 minutes to do something with your cell phone camera. So if for some strange reason you don't have a cell phone with a camera, if you are at home at the moment and you do have access to a camera of any kind, please do go and get it now. If not, then please have your cell phone ready so that you can take a picture with your cell phone. I see somebody asking, is it only for primary school? I am focusing on primary school because I do represent for Pearson a primary school series. However, what I talk about, I think, is relevant to any level of education, although my examples will be specifically focused on primary school, to be completely transparent. So what are future skills? Could you use the chat box? Just looking at this term in isolation, what do you understand when you see this question up on the screen? There's no correct answer. I do obviously have something in mind. Well, what would you consider future skills? 21st century skills, says Nino, thank you. Soft skills, digital, cooperation, IT, 4Cs. Somebody read my presentation introduction. Communication, life skills, yeah. Oh, empathy, I like that one. Thank you, Magdalena. Communication, critical thinking. Okay. Those are all fantastic answers. Now, what if I said to you, why would we want to include future skills? I mean, I suppose it's pretty obvious to ask, but let's see what you write. They solve complex problems, says Diana. Thank you. Why would you use future skills in the classroom? If you can write in the chat. It's all gone quiet now. More difficult, possibly. We'll see what comes up. I don't have to achieve success. Exactly. That is the objective of anything we do in the classroom, isn't it? It's to try to make what we do with our students a more successful experience for them as students and a more successful experience for us as teachers, and to achieve the results that we want, to achieve more engagement. Somebody says, Ksenia, I'm really sorry. I probably ruined the pronunciation of your name. Preparing people for future challenges. Indeed. Make language useful in life. Exactly. Alexandra's actually just told you my conclusion, so you can go away now. You don't have to stay in the presentation any longer. To be part of a society, exactly. It's to help us to be part of to help us better work with each other and with all of the people that we need to work with. Somebody writes global citizenship. Thank you. You're a very switched on audience. This is great. I hope you're going to get something from this because I'm probably going to be telling you lots of things you already know based on what I'm seeing in the chat. So before we look specifically at what future skills are, we need to, I think it's interesting to go back and think about what the future was. Now, I'm definitely not young, but I'm not old either. And in my teaching career, I've come across a huge number of methodologies. I also do a lot of research into language teaching, which has put me into contact with all sorts of other methodologies. But if I think of some of the principal English teaching methodologies that I have either used or been very close to, as in there have been books in my school library or in the university library which use these methodologies, or I have found activities which use these methodologies within teaching materials that I use. Here are some of them, and I'm just going to ask you to excuse me for one moment. I didn't realize my cat is trapped inside my studio, so inside my study. So I'm just going to let my cat out because she's going to be meowing all the way through the presentation if I don't. So do excuse me for 1 second. Oh, the joys of doing webinars from home. The cat started meowing. So thank you. She's a gorgeous cat. Yeah, she's, I don't know what you call it in English. In Spanish, I don't think it might be the same. In Spanish, they call them caray, which is when you have that sort of black and gold color in your cat. Anyway, yes, the cat's rule, Natalia, exactly. So when you look at these methodologies, these were all promised to be, the next big thing, the next way that guaranteed that a language would be learned effectively. I don't think any of them are necessarily good or bad in an absolute sense. Some of them were proven to be more effective than others, but all had relevance at the time in which they were popular. And where we are nowadays is in what many people are calling the post-method era. It's not that we don't use methods anymore. It's that we've understood that using one method in isolation is never a good thing. What we find in many teaching materials, whether they're homegrown curricula or whether they're materials from a publisher, what you're finding is a combination of the best parts of many methodologies which have come before, and they're all woven together. So we now can't really say that we use a project-based learning approach, because when we actually analyze what we do, there's a bit of project-based learning. There will be a little bit of all sorts of other types of approach as well. And what I think many people and institutions are focusing on now is looking at how we incorporate the teaching of fundamental skills within language learning. So we're understanding that learning a language is really just a sort of baseline over which we lay out all sorts of other skills. So by learning a language, you open doors to be able to act or interact in new ways in your life. And the reason you do that is to build skills, build experience, build opportunities. So what we're understanding is that learning a language is really, it's just something we do to enable us to do something else. It's a little bit, you don't buy a car just for the sake of buying a car. You buy a car so that you can go to other places. You can go and do the shopping, you can go on holiday, and so on and so forth. It's a little bit like learning English. You don't learn English to learn English, you learn English because of what it does for you. So what we're looking at more and more and more is the incorporation and the reinforcement of fundamental skills within language learning. So what precisely are future skills? If we think of future skills, or as a few people put in the chat a moment ago, 21st century skills, sometimes known as the 4 C's, what are they? Could you use the chat box to write something that you consider to be a future skill, something that you think is important to reinforce in your classroom so that your students have better opportunities in the future? So use the chat, please. What's a future skill? Teamwork, communication. Yep, absolutely. Cooperation. We've got the 4 C's coming out. IT skills. Teamwork again. Autonomy. That's interesting. Teamwork and autonomy being juxtaposed there, but both very true. Self-management, empathy. If you're not looking at the chat box, I do recommend that you have a look at the chat. It's really interesting. There's lots of good ideas coming out there. Confidence, interpersonal skills, emotional intelligence. Exactly. All of those things are skills. Most of those are soft skills that are coming through there. Future skills are a combination of hard and soft skills. Most of them could probably be considered to be soft skills. Now, what you've got up on the screen is a list of future skills, which was produced by a US government agency a few years ago. And this is just some of the ones that they produced. Now, when you look at this list, it's massive. I couldn't make the font big enough to even be able to read it from where I'm sitting in front of my screen. And I'm sure once this has been transferred across the world to where you are, it's basically unintelligible. And this is the problem with future skills. Number one, there's no one list of future skills which is considered to be the only definitive list. And number two, whichever list you look at, it's just too long. You don't have time to process, understand, and then work out how to apply this to your teaching. So what happened or started to happen a few years ago, as people have already identified, and somebody who I do apologize, I don't read your script, so I can't read your name, but I can see that somebody wrote communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity. Exactly. So what happened was people realized we needed to start looking at future skills within umbrella topics to make them easier to approach and to look at the main reasons why we would use them. So communication being the first one, as the world becomes smaller in the sense of, in a communication sense, we need to be able to interact with people from all sorts of different backgrounds, all sorts of different cultures, with all sorts of different sensibilities, sensitivities, and all sorts of different expectations on interaction with other people. We need to be able to collaborate more than ever before. we just look at something like today's session. This is a very simple form of collaboration, but you're all collaborating with me and with each other. I hope you identify that. Every time you write something in the chat, it's a form of collaboration on many different levels. Creativity is a very misunderstood skill. People tend to think of creativity first as being something to do with painting or drawing. It is that, but it's also very much more, as we'll have a look at in a minute. And finally, critical thinking. And somebody asked in the chat, what about digital literacy? That's Diana asks, what about digital literacy? Could we include it in future skills? Yes, absolutely. It's a fundamental part of future skills. And I think it's become especially relevant in recent times, this need to be digitally literate. It's interesting. I've been doing webinars now for something in the region of 14 years. I was quite an early starter in webinars. And I used to ask people to write something in the chat. And I know this is very, very simple, but it is part of digital literacy. I used to ask people to write a response in the chat, and I'd get maybe one response. Whereas now we're so used to the concept of chat, I ask people to write something in the chat, and I'm getting hundreds of responses. Before this presentation closes, I would invite you to scroll back through the chat. And that in itself is a form of digital literacy. So we're going to have a look at these one by one. I'm probably going quite fast because I want to leave time for questions at the end. So if you do have anything you'd like to pick up on from any of these topics, I will give you my contact details at the end of the presentation so we can engage in a more detailed conversation later. So starting off by looking at communication. So what does communication actually mean? What it actually means is our ability to convey ideas. And I should actually add, I've just realized for the next time I do this presentation, I need to add another box. That's our ability to accept and understand ideas. So when we're thinking about how we convey ideas, we need to consider a number of different aspects within the conveying of ideas. So what are we focusing on? I mean, I might say to you, it's a lovely morning in Bogota. That's far too general. So as we begin to focus that down, what do I mean by lovely? What's lovely to me? Does that mean it's sunny? Does that mean it's not raining? Does that mean it's quiet? Because I live in quite a noisy city, so lovely might mean that it's quiet. So the first thing we need to think about with communication is what the focus is. Obviously, we have the medium, and I think that's where we could incorporate Diana's comment about digital literacy. A lot of our communication nowadays is digital. So there's a strong focus on that, but the medium of communication is multiple, and even within digital communication or print communication or spoken communication, there are all sorts of different levels within that as well, of formality and informality, of length and of purpose. Who's our audience? I'm talking today to an audience of teachers, so I talk in a very different way to when I'm talking to an audience of students or to an audience of managers. What level of engagement are we expecting? For example, today have a much lower expectation for the engagement with my communication than I would have if we were sitting in a room together. And if we were in a room together, I can see we have 237 people on this webinar. That's quite a lot of people. So I would have a lower level of expectation for engagement with 237 people than with 2 people or 20 people. Because number one, it's intimidating to interact with so many people watching you. Number 2, there are too many people to be able to interact effectively with very many of them, and so on and so forth. And what kind of response do I expect? So when I ask you to put something in the chat, what am I expecting? I'm not expecting an essay. I'm not even expecting a paragraph. I'm not even expecting a sentence. I'm expecting exactly what you are doing, which are these sort of bullet points, one-word answers. So every time we look at any of the future skills, and in this case, communication, we need to unwrap it and unpack it and think, what does that actually imply? What do I have to think about? And then within each of these subtopics, there's a number of different aspects. So as we look at each of these different aspects, it becomes even more complex because if we take the medium, for example, it could be text, it could be print, but a combination of texts and images, for example. It could be email, it could be multimedia, it could be color or black and white. It could even be tactile. I might be communicating something through an object. So all of these things need to be considered as you're considering how to work on communication. But if you were to do this, or to try to do this every single time you designed an activity, it would possibly drive you crazy, and it would definitely take up much more time than you have available to be able to do this. So as you look at your materials, and I am going to be looking at English code today because, as I said, I do represent English code for Pearson, but as you're analyzing your materials, whichever they are from whichever publisher or your own materials, it's important to bear these aspects in mind and to have a look at how your materials approach the concept of future skills within a context that incorporates all of these different aspects. So in English code, communication is dealt with through multiple types of activities, some of them spoken, some of them written, multimedia activities, and a lot of them are linked to collaboration, as we'll have a look at in a moment. Communication and collaboration are also very, very closely linked. In the lower levels, it's really important with the younger children that as you look at communicative activities, that they are very, very approachable. So as you look at something like the activity on the left-hand side of your screen now, act out the story in groups. But what you're actually doing is you're doing some coloring, and you're acting out the story by comparing the coloring, and you're explaining why you chose to color the bird red or blue or whatever it happens to be. There's a very huge visual element to communication as we look at younger age groups. As we look at older age groups, communication is something which is very much, not very much, it's definitely less visual, and much more emphasis is placed on the justification part of communication. Which is something I think to do with much more to do with the global nature of communication and the needs for communication as we move into the future. It's about justifying your ideas much more than just stating your ideas. So you will find as you go into communication activities in the higher levels, there's a much greater emphasis on planning, on preparation, on process, on taking steps to achieve a more effective level of communication. If we have a look at collaboration, what does collaboration mean? I think it should be fairly obvious that collaboration is about working together. And when we're looking at working together, what does that mean? Well, who is working together? What are you working on? Where are you working? And I think this comes back to the digital literacy question, which is, again, responding to that. It's a fundamental part of all future skills is digital literacy. And I think a lot of that is to do with where we work together. A lot of the time now, right now, I haven't been in a situation, in a face-to-face situation with teachers for almost 2 years now, which is just crazy. But I've had to adapt. So the where is now, for me, this digital space. So I'm trying to deal with the 4 C's across a digital space. Just out of interest, can you write in the chat box, just very simply, yes or no, have you been able to go back to face-to-face teaching of your students? Are you in a classroom with your students, or are you online with your students? Can you just write in the chat, online, classroom, yes or no? It's a mix, but it seems, oh wow, this is lovely. So many people responding. Thank you, I love this. Wow, that's interesting. It seems that most people are doing at least some classroom. Interesting. And if I asked you to write in the chat, a lot of people have changed their opinion. This is why I asked this question. If I had asked 2 years ago, what do you prefer, teaching in the classroom or teaching online? I think 2 years ago, we would have had over 95% of people saying teaching in the classroom. But a lot of students, especially that I've spoken to recently, have expressed that they are enjoying teaching and learning online. So could you write in the chat, classroom or online, depending on what you prefer? And I'm already seeing people are writing classroom. Yeah. A couple of people writing online. That's really interesting. I think we've learned a lot. Wow, this is fantastic. You're so participative. Thank you. I love this. Oh, well, that's a really interesting. Somebody says before the pandemic online and nowadays in the classroom. That's really interesting. And I think Ekaterina's written something really interesting, and I think that happened to a lot of us. Before the pandemic, it was like, no, only in the class. But as we've been forced into this situation of teaching online, we've realized it can be really useful and really fruitful. What I would invite you, depends on the weather, thank you, Natalia. So what I would invite you to do after this presentation, if you haven't done so already, is really have a look at what benefits or how you have adapted your communication style for online teaching, and how you believe your students have adapted their learning patterns for online learning. I've been very, very fortunate. One of my current contracts is I'm advising a school and helping a school to renew its bilingual curriculum. And it would have been an interesting job 2 years ago. It's even more interesting now because they teach using Zoom, and they record all of their classes for posterity, but also for security and child safety and safeguarding reasons. So I have had access to hundreds of hours of online classes that have been recorded, and I can go back in time. So I can go back to literally the first class where the teachers were saying, "Hi, students, you must all be really scared because of COVID," and the students have no idea what's going on. And it's literally the very first time that a group of primary school students have been sitting in front of a camera to receive their education. And I can track across time how teachers have adapted their styles and how students have adapted their styles. And in some cases, this has happened very organically. And in other cases, it's been a much more planned process where the teachers have sat down and thought, how do I need to change my style of communication? And especially when we're looking at collaboration, how have I needed to change the way that I ask people to work together? Because it's very different having 4 people sitting around a table in a classroom that I can see and manage, to having 4 people working together in a breakout room on Zoom. So if you can do this at your school, or if you're a school manager who's interested, I'd really recommend it. It's fascinating. Go back 12 months, come forward 9 months, and then another 3 months, and just have a look at the way that people have changed their styles to be able to teach digitally. It's absolutely fascinating. Anyway, back to the point. Collaboration. We need to think about the different aspects of collaboration. And if we break that down, there's all sorts of other sub aspects to collaboration. So, who's the leader in the group? Are we allowing them to express their natural leadership? And are we also helping them to open up their needs to lead and control, to allow others to contribute more effectively? When we look at English code and the way that it works with collaboration, every single page of English code has a collaborative activity. In the lower levels, collaboration is very much more simple. So, creating a menu. So what would you put on a menu? It's super simple. It's very much more about idea generation, a little bit like we're doing today. This is the simplest form of collaboration, where you just ask people to contribute ideas, to brainstorm ideas. It's the simplest form of collaboration. And as we go into higher levels, it becomes much more complex. For example, activity 3 on the left-hand side is when you think about it, it's actually a very, very complex form of collaboration. So what form of motion do these rides have? We're talking about a fun fair, and we're talking about, we're having to incorporate physics within this concept. So forms of motion and the forces of motion. And then you discuss this with a partner to achieve a higher level of understanding, which is a much, much more complex form of collaboration. Moving on, because we don't have very much more time, within creativity, before we actually look specifically at how creativity works with the 4 C's, I have an activity for you. It says activity 2. Yeah, that's because we were going to do some yoga at the beginning of the presentation, but I decided there just wasn't time to do yoga today. So this is actually activity 1, and it's the only activity. I will tell you what I want you to do with this activity in just a moment. If you could please get your cell phones ready, open up the camera application. Just while you're doing that, Ekaterina says we can make chat rooms in Zoom for teens. They adore this kind of work. Yes, they do indeed. Although I don't know your experience. My experience is I have to be much, much more active in going into the different chat rooms to make sure that they're on task. I can find it. If you have any tips that you can put in the chat box, Ekaterina, that you have found useful to keep teenagers on task when they're in Zoom chat rooms, please do share them. And Magdalena says there's always time for yoga. Next time I will remember that, Magdalena. So if you could get your camera, and what I would like you to do is to take a selfie where you are right now. Or if you don't feel like you're looking very good today, or you don't like selfies, take a photo, please, of your workspace, the view from your workspace, your pet, something that's meaningful to you where you are right now. Perhaps there is a book on your desk that you have found really interesting. If you could take a picture right now, selfie, something meaningful to you, take that picture. I'll give you 30 seconds whilst I am having a drink of coffee. Okay, so if you haven't finished taking your photo, please finish it whilst I am talking. Save that. I will ask you to do something with it in just a moment. It will all become clear. So when we look at creativity, like I said before, creativity is often interpreted as something which involves literally being creative. And then we tend to think of the arts, design, things like that, drawing, painting. Creativity is really about thinking differently. It's about expressing yourself very often in different ways. Creativity is very much linked to problem solving. It could be art and crafts and design as well. But if you haven't already considered this, please always, when you look at creativity, go beyond the obvious drawing or painting. So when we look at creativity, if we look at the concept of problem solving, which I'll tell you why I'm speaking specifically about problem solving in just a moment, there's a need. So what's the problem that needs to be solved? What's the history? Why did it become a problem? What is the why is it a problem in itself? What issues is it causing? If you look at it from different perspectives, why is it a problem according to different people in different situations, and what action are you going to take to resolve it? And then you divide that down, or so you split that out into a number of different components and a number of different ways that this problem could be resolved. So for example, songs, which I have up here, you might say, well, what's that got to do with problem solving? Well, if you think about preschool and early primary students, songs are a way of solving the problem of perfecting pronunciation very often. Songs and chants being used within phonics programs as a way of creatively solving the problem of poor pronunciation. So creativity encompasses a huge number of different areas within learning and within life as well. And in the context of what I'm going to talk about in just a moment, creativity is really focused on problem solving. And why is this important? I think it's important in the context that we live in today. The global context. I'm sorry, I lost my thread of thought completely. I do apologize. Problem solving is a hugely important part of language learning because of the fact that people will be working, your students as they go into their later lives will be working with people from all across the world in lots of different situations. The need to be able to creatively and collaboratively creatively solve problems in a foreign language is an incredibly important need. And it's something which the earlier you can include that in the classroom, the earlier you can start getting your students used to doing this, the more effective it will be, and the more useful it will be to them in later life. English code creativity is very much linked with problem solving in English code. In the lower levels, we go from very simple forms of creatively solving problems, like making your own picture dictionary. If you look at remembering words, is in a way, not in a way, it is a problem for language learners. And then creatively finding a solution to that is something as simple as perhaps making your own picture dictionary. Creativity might actually involve painting or drawing. So the Chinese dragon activity, where you make a Chinese dragon and you show that to your friends, and that's about the more traditional way of looking at creativity being something to do with art and design. And then in experiment time, which you can see on the right hand side, that's about creatively solving problems through experimentation and testing and iteration. In higher levels, it follows a similar pattern, but it becomes much more complex. For example, the activity on the right-hand side, how do we report the news? Finding ways to report the news is about creatively solving a problem. The problem is, how do I tell people what's happening in a way that's engaging and interesting to them? And the creative part is actually finding the solution to that and doing it. And that goes and that becomes progressively more complex as the series goes on. Critical thinking is about problem solving, and it's very much linked. As you can see, we're kind of iterating on everything that's come before. So as we come through the creative nature of problem solving, critical thinking is about solving the problem itself. Again, if we split this out into some of the different component parts of critical thinking, this is what we need to analyze as we're thinking, how do I design a critical thinking activity? What concept am I looking at? What type of activity is it? Is it creative? Is it more analytical? Is it investigative? So on and so forth. Why do I need to do this? What's the point? What am I trying to do? Am I trying to reinforce a language learning point? Am I trying to incorporate cross-curricular learning into the language classroom? And I won't go through each of these because I'm very, very aware that I've only got about 10 minutes left if I want to leave you time for questions. But we can then also split this out into its component parts. So as we're looking at critical thinking, that then involves all sorts of other undercurrents which need to be contemplated by the students and by yourself as you're designing the activities. English code looks at critical thinking starting with one of the most basic forms of critical thinking, which is the big question. I don't know if any of you use big questions in your classrooms, but those are a fundamental part of critical thinking, especially for younger learners. So for example, how can I make an art store? Now that might not seem like critical thinking in itself, but it is, in the sense that what it requires students to do is conceptualize a problem and find ways of resolving that problem. And especially as they're interacting with each other, bringing in the collaborative element of the 4 Cs and the communicative element as well. It's about, how do I interpret other people's ideas and means and ways of achieving understanding, respect them and incorporate them into my own learning and understanding. So the lower levels are seemingly quite simple, but they're laying the groundwork for more complex critical thinking activities coming later. Some of the interesting ones I find are the visual critical thinking activities. So identifying differences in an image. So visual analysis and interpretation, and many, many other aspects as well. As we go into the higher levels, we still have things, aspects like the big question, but they become much more complex. So just to contrast the big question between these 2 slides, I've gone back a slide. How can I make an art store? That can be quite a complex question, but at first sight, it's a very simple question, and it is much more simple than saying, how can we design our ideal school? When you have a look at those 2 questions, very, very different focuses. The first one, how can I make an art store, is basically about producing a list in a way like we've been doing today. Whereas how can I design our ideal school? You can't answer that with a bullet list of responses. You need to actually provide a more detailed, thoughtful response to that. And then you go into the justification of why ideal. What does ideal mean to you? What does ideal mean to me? A little bit like we just did with the online and the classroom. So if you scroll back through the answers to my question about online or classroom, that gives us the groundwork to develop a much deeper and more complex level of interaction. So somebody, again, I'm sorry, I don't read the script of your name, so I can't say your name, but somebody wrote the classroom is better, but online can, but it can be effective as online. So I would say, well, why? What do you mean by that? What does better mean to you? So define better as a classroom experience, and what's effective. Why is online just as effective, and how has that? So I think you see what I mean. By asking a simple question, we then produce the responses to be able to analyze at a much deeper level and achieve a much greater level of understanding. Somebody else writes, I prefer in-class teaching, but with high-tech tools. So I'm sure you can work out what, or you can predict what I'm going to say here. I would say, well, why do you prefer in-class teaching? Explain what that means to you, and then what's high-tech to you? I mean, high-tech to you might be different to high-tech for me. So by asking a big question in a different way according to the age group or the age level of the students enables us to achieve a very different level of interaction and a different level of a different purpose or a different reason behind doing the activity. The experiment time activities in English code are very much about complex problem solving, again, which is part of critical thinking. And I'm going a little bit into too much detail about English code, I've just realized. So I'm going to stop and I'm going to go back to the purpose of the presentation. So the 4 C's: communication, collaboration, creativity, and critical thinking. We've been working with, I think, for some years now. Most people are now familiar with these concepts, and something which is an emerging concept now, which is something that a lot of educators are working on and Pearson is incorporating into their materials, is something which is known as the coding mindset. Have you ever encountered the term the coding mindset before? When you look at this, if you could use the chat box, what's the first thing you think of? If you do know what this is, please do write this into the chat box. If you're not really sure what it is, write in the chat box what your first reaction is when you see the term the coding mindset. Ooh, interesting. That question's produced silence. Just a guess, connected with mindfulness. That's really interesting. Thank you for that. No ideas. Growth mindset. Looks like it's connected with programming. Very interesting answer. Associations with something. Difficult question, indeed. I think this chat, for me today, this chat has been one of the most interesting chat boxes I have been able to produce recently. I'm going to save this chat before we go, because it shows you precisely the nature of different, or the effect of different forms of questioning. So when I've asked more approachable questions that have lots of background knowledge, I've had lots of responses. I mean, it's really obvious, but it's super interesting to see it in action quite so explicitly. And I've asked a more complex question, which produced silence. Then it produced a few tentative responses. And then I'm assuming some people might have gone and Googled this, possibly, because the responses are becoming more complex now, and they're getting much closer to what the coding mindset actually is. So I would recommend you do scroll back through this chat as an interesting way of looking at precisely why it's important to contemplate what I've been talking about today. When you first mention the term coding mindset and then start investigating it, it often produces a reaction like this, because the first thing that you usually find when you Google it is something to do with computer programming, as I can't find it now. Somebody wrote in the chat that it's to do with programming. Yes, the term the coding mindset comes from the world of computer science, and it comes from computer programming, which when you find that out, you think, what? I'm an English teacher. You're telling me I have to contemplate computer programming? No, not at all. What this is all about is looking at what we're realizing is that if we look at the way a computer programmer works, it's a very, very interesting reflection on an effective way of learning something. What the coding mindset is about identifying a problem. It's about collaboratively exploring possible solutions to that problem. And then one of the most important aspects of computer programming is identifying which is the most efficient solution. There are always multiple solutions to any problem, whether that's a problem of a bug in a piece of computer code, or a problem of how to express yourself in a presentation or in a job interview or in a social conversation. There's multiple ways of doing this. In the world of computer programming, efficiency is incredibly important. It's perhaps less important today than it was 10 or 20 years ago, because we have so much more computing power available to us. But it is still important, because I look at this device, the less efficient the computer code is, the shorter the battery life will be. And if you're anything like me, one of the everyday problems that you have, it's not really a problem, is it? But one of the everyday problems that you have is your phone running out of battery, and you urgently need to contact somebody and your phone is telling you it's about to run out of battery, or you're trying to investigate something and you see your battery icon go red and you think, oh my, and you're searching for somewhere to plug in. That is about inefficient computer code, effectively, or inefficient use of your phone. Anyway, back to the point. Identifying the most efficient solution is an incredibly important part of the coding mindset, and then testing, revising, and then changing it. So reiterating, learning from your mistakes, and implementing it in a way that's accessible and reusable. Unless you have analyzed computer code, you wouldn't necessarily know this, but I personally, I don't write computer code, I write HTML code, so code for websites. And what you often find when you're analyzing other people's code is they comment that code, and there's a special syntax that you use so that the computer ignores that particular line, but a human being will read it, and it tells you why the programmer chose to write the code in that particular way. And this is about making it accessible and reusable. So having explained all of that, let's just go back through and read this in one go and reflect as a language teacher on this definition. Identify a problem, collaboratively explore possible solutions, identify the most efficient one, and then test, revise, reiterate, and implement it in a way that's accessible and reusable. Learning a language, right? It's exactly what you do to be an effective language learner. So Pearson's incorporated the coding mindset into English code, and I think this will be something that's you'll see more and more in the future. The coding mindset doesn't require any technology or programming abilities. It's integrated throughout the series. It's really easy to use. It's about taking future skills and incorporating them into meaningful tasks which are useful for language learning. It does reflect the skills and the mindset of a coder, which, as you can see up on the screen, are persistence, collaboration, troubleshooting, and all sorts of other things. And interestingly, in English code, it also teaches and reinforces coding style skills. So you will find activities which are linked to algorithms, sequences, functions, events. And if you're thinking, I'm not a maths teacher, that's fine. That's the kind of thing you do a lot in maths, but it's incorporated into English code in a way that an English teacher can easily manage, and in a way that underpins and reinforces and strengthens the way that language is learned. So English code, and you can do this with any curriculum. Like I said before, I'm using English code because I represent English code, but you can layer this on top of any other curriculum. It uses the coding mindset as the foundation layer for future skills, and it ensures that what students learn in English class is not just English, but it's vital life skills that prepare them for the challenges of contemporary life. And that's really what I had to say today. Before I open up the chat box to questions, I would like you to conduct activity. Well, it's not really activity 3. It's not even activity 2. It's actually activity 1. And it's what I want you to do with your photo. What I would like you to do before I open up the presentation to debate or more specific questions on any of the information that I've shared with you today, please would you send the photo that you took earlier to this email address. And in just a second, I'll show you what I'm going to do with those photographs. It's something I've been doing for the past year because I find it incredibly lonely, and I'm not asking for any kind of sympathy, but I find it really lonely to be sitting here at home. I can't hear any of you. I mean, I can get some personalities coming out in the chat. It's really interesting because you see the same person replying a number of times. You get a sense of their personality, but I can't hear the person's voice. I can't see you. I can't be having a coffee after the presentation and meet you and find something out about you or your students or your family or your cat or whatever it happens to be. So I started doing this activity of taking photos to try to generate a sense of community within what I do. I will put my email address back on the screen in a moment. I just want to go forward and show you what I do with all of these. Every single photo, I'll take all of the photographs that you send me and I will turn them into a collage. And everybody who has sent me their photo will receive back within the next week, depending on if I get lots of photos, it takes a little bit longer to put them together. But depending on the number of photos I get, within a week at the most, you'll get an email back from me with a collage of all of the different photographs. So you'll be able to see the people who you were with, in inverted commas, today. You'll be able to see something about their surroundings. Occasionally, you'll see a recommendation for a book. Other times, you'll see a picture of somebody's cat. This one I particularly like because that cat on the bottom right-hand side of the image is basically like my own cat's cousin from somewhere on the other side of the world, which I thought was beautiful. So yeah, lots of dogs and cats as well. So just to put up my email again, there you go. Please send your selfie /dog /cat /view /book to this address. Thank you for your kind comments in the chat about it being a nice idea. I'd recommend doing this with your students as well. It's something that I've done with students. They all know each other anyway. They've all been in the classroom together, but very few of them have ever actually been in online learning environments together. So it's quite interesting. You might ask them to do something like send you a photograph which expresses how they're feeling today. So they might make a face, a happy face or a sad face. Sometimes they'll send you a photograph of a drawing which expresses their feelings. Other times they will send you a photograph of an album cover, which expresses a way that they're feeling. You could ask them to take a photograph of the sky outside their house. A million different ideas. Anyway, I do want to leave at least 5 minutes for questions, which leaves me 1 more minute to wrap this up. So please do send me your photographs. Think about how you could do this with your students, and it's a great way of generating a sense of community, or at the very least being able to see who the group of people were that you were sitting with for the last 55 minutes. So thank you very much for listening. I hope I've given you some ideas or at least some inspiration to continue thinking and researching. If you're interested in English code, you can find out more at the address on the screen. I've already given you my email. If you prefer to WhatsApp me, go to the contact section of my website. My cell phone number's up there and you can WhatsApp me. So what questions do you have, if any, for me now? Thank you. I really appreciate you thanking me. That's very kind of you, everybody. If you do have any questions, I am... Oh, so someone said, can you type the email again, please? I'm just going to type my email into the chat box. So you've got that there. Whoever asked for my email, there you go. Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to make this too commercial, but Monica asked, does it go with Pearson presentation tools? Yes, the series, it's a 6-level series. There's also a starter level, so it's a 7-level series, but 6 main levels. There's an online, an online platform, and on that platform, there's a presentation tool, which is the full student's guide that you can project up on the screen, and it has all of the audio and the video incorporated into it. So that you can teach if you have a smart board or just a TV in your classroom, or if you're teaching digitally as well, you can share your web browser and use those materials to teach with. All of the videos, all of the audio are online. There's lots of extra activities which are in the platform as well. There's a practice platform for students. There's a student's book that's online, and also everything is available in physical format as well. So thank you very much for that question. What book do I recommend for primary school? I have to say English Code. I think it's the best book around at the moment, not just because I represent it. I wouldn't have agreed to represent it if I didn't think it was a very, very effective series. It's engaging, it's interesting, it's modern, and it's very, very comprehensive. And most importantly for me, it provides multiple opportunities to give learning experiences to students that learn in different ways. So it allows me to differentiate in the way that I provide learning experiences to my students. Any other questions or comments? I'm not going to open my email yet, so I don't know how many people have emailed me. I hope lots and lots and lots. Magdalena's jealous of my weather. Yeah, the thing is, Magdalena, it's been raining for a whole month, so no need to be jealous. It's just like I'm now coming out of where you're about to go into, I think. So I will enjoy it. I'm going to go out on my bike in a minute and think about how much I'd like to meet you all soon. Okay, well, if there are no more questions or comments, I would like to thank Pearson for organizing this webinar series, and I would like to thank all of you for giving me a little bit of your time today. Busy teachers giving me their time is something which is very meaningful to me. So thank you very much. I hope you have a lovely afternoon. For an 8-year-old, second years, somebody's asking what level I would recommend for an 8-year-old. 8-year-olds is about level 2 or 3. It depends on the linguistic progress that you've achieved up until now. What I would recommend is going to the pearsonenglish.com/English code website, and you'll find a lot more information about the curriculum, and you'll find the scope and sequence pages there, so you can properly analyze the level of linguistic development of your students and how that matches the different levels of the books. Okay, I'm not sure if somebody from Pearson or our organizers comes back now, or if we just sort of end. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. Help, please, somebody from Pearson or Jacek. What